So I just want to say one thing. Jessica, thank you for inviting me. I will say that I really, really was looking forward to getting that bobblehead doll because I see all of your other speakers posting it on social media. So I see it. I'm like, yes. All right. I'm going to jump right in. So I'm going to talk about how to market in the new normal and thinking about how we can readjust our digital marketing plans for 2022. All right. So here's the agenda. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the landscape, your new customer, how to adjust to this new landscape and customer. We're going to talk about your customer personas and your buyer's journey. Those are the 5 major things I'm going to focus on today. But before doing so, I want to go back into time. And I want to think about all of the events that created a new normal. How many of you remember this event? Occupy Wall Street movement. This is back in about 2008 when there was shady and unethical business practices from the financial markets, from the housing markets, and people were pissed. They took over Wall Street. And this is the particular moment where brands had to become more transparent because ultimately their target audience wanted them to do so. They demanded them to do so. And this is really where I think you start to see changes in commercial communications. You start to see more diversity in a lot of the brand's communications. You start to see brands open up and sort of pull back the curtain and show you what is happening in terms of internal operations. Even for new restaurants, you start to see open plans where you can actually see in the back of the kitchen, right? I think all of that happened after this particular event. And then we have this event. I'm sure we may all know this. The Me Too movement. Now, this is where customers made sure that the brands were accountable for who they associated themselves with. Whether brands are sponsoring certain individuals or certain, shows or events, to who they actually hire on their staff. Now, you think the average consumer would believe that marketing is supposed to illuminate the values of a brand. But that disconnection of trust it occurs when these individuals do deplorable things that ultimately affect and impact the brand and how consumers perceive it. And then you have this, the Black Lives Matter movement. As a brand, you essentially had to either take a stance on an issue or show that you were sensitive to the issue. And all of this is happening in the middle of the worst pandemic of our lifetime. People are dying, jobs are lost, industries are affected and impacted. And so ultimately, it creates a new normal. So how can you prepare for this new normal? Ultimately, that's what I want to talk about today. So let's dive in. Let's talk about this new landscape. How many of you are working with an agency or are an agency? I know we have a lot of now members. So you probably have noticed an uptick in clients if you're working in the digital space, because now clients are forced to communicate with their target audience through digital. Meaning if you haven't doubled down on digital by now, you're almost forced to. And so other industries such as the hospitality industry and, travel and so on are greatly impacted. Now, when we think about the new customer, we want to consider how most people ultimately believe that the pandemic is going to drive long-term change. So what does this have to do with your communication to those target audience members? Well, if you think about all the things that you were normally doing, and if you consider how your target audience is becoming savvier, you'd understand that ultimately on digital platforms, you're going to have a greater impact because people are now accustomed to it. You have grandparents who are now digitally savvy because they're forced to. They know about this Zoom thing. So if you continue to leverage this platform with the understanding that ultimately your consumers are adjusted to this new way of life. Now, when we think about revamping your digital strategies, your digital marketing strategies for 2022, I'm going to start focusing on your brand voice. These are some of the ways that you can reassess your upcoming marketing campaigns. Now, when I talk about brand voice, I'm not just speaking about how you sound on social media or what's on your website, but it's all the things in between, all of the digital touch points that make up your brand. And when you consider the different components of that brand voice, you want to consider, the characteristics, the human characteristics of that brand voice, the tone, the purpose of why you are serving your audience, and that ownable point of view of whatever opinion you have as a brand on different issues that I've mentioned earlier. So one case study that I absolutely love, and I'm sure you guys may be familiar with it, is the Wendys Roast. I love this campaign because they essentially took a very vanilla voice and just remixed it. And when I was driving on the way up here, someone told me that it was originated in Columbus, I believe. And the inspiration for it was Quibi. Am I even saying that right? QB? QB, yeah. And I also heard, I think Brian told me that they have dolls hanging up on the wall. It's like oddly interesting, right? So I love the way they revamped their brand voice. And this was done well before the algorithm started to reward more personality in your brand communications. So what they did is they essentially roasted everyone. No one was safe. If you interacted with their Twitter account, you're getting roasted. They're talking about their competitors. And this really started the whole the chicken sandwich challenge or whatever, right? Like this started all of that. And so even Hamburger Helper took a page from Wendy's playbook. In this post, it says, PSA, knowing how to mix Hamburger Helper doesn't make you wife material. Hamburger Helper jumps in and says, and this makes you husband material? Another user jumps in and says, drag him, you sexy ass glove. Another person says, OMG, all these food accounts becoming some clapback champs, and I love it. What's really interesting here is that Wendy's and Hamburger Helper went from servitude to attitude. They went from servitude to attitude. And when you think about it, nowadays on social platforms, customers don't want to be helped, they want to be engaged. I'll say it again. On social platforms, customers don't want to be helped, they want to be engaged. Now, why is that important? Well, when we think about it, if you've gone to any social media conference in the last, let's say 5 years, let's say more closer to 5 years ago, most of those tracks or topics were around customer service, right? If you're a brand, you think about social as a customer service channel. Now, it's completely different. As a brand, you should think about going from servitude to attitude. Well, why does this matter? Well, one, as marketers, we know you're naturally going to get rewarded by the algorithms by having a personal voice, less salesy, less promotional. All those types of engagements and communication are going to be rewarded in the algorithm. And so as marketers, we should certainly consider that, especially during the new normal. Because during this downtime, most of your target audience members were focusing on engaging with family members, friends, and they may not be considering even patronizing your business because they may not have the money to, or they may not be in the place for that at this moment. So what does that mean? Well, it means when you focus on your communication with those individuals, you have to have that personality. So if you have a very buttoned up brand, consider reassessing that brand voice going forward, because in the new normal, that's more important than ever. Now, most of us, I'm sure, are probably working from home. And most of us, I'm sure, your days have definitely changed since the beginning of the pandemic. And we also know that most of you probably want to continue to work from home. Some of you may be at a remote location. But in this particular survey, the majority of the respondents say they would even consider looking for a new job if they had to go back to the office. And it's interesting because on my team, I've hired 2 more people that had to stay in their office and they didn't want to. They wanted to work remotely. So this is definitely impacting the market. But what does that have to do with you? Well, when we think about the ways in which we create communications for our target audience, we can consider them in different day parts. And day parting is essentially a term used in, I don't know if anyone ever worked in broadcast media, you know what I'm talking about. For me, what day part looks like is waking up in the morning when I was younger for Saturday morning cartoons. And then in the evening, watching TV, and it'll be some type of family-oriented type of content. For me, it was every Thursday. It was The Cosby Show at 8 p.m. I'll never forget. And then A Different World came on at 8:30. I wasn't able to watch a lot of TV, but those are some of the things that I was able to watch because it was positive perceptions of Black people on TV. And so when we think about day parting and how we as marketers are able to create communication that's aligned with the day parts of our target audience, we have to understand that the new normal consists of a change in the daily behaviors of your target audience. So, for example, instead of waking up in the morning, going to the gym, they may hop on their Peloton, like Brian. Instead of going to the coffee shop, they may go to the kitchen. Or instead of their work desk to the laptop, or even instead of going home, going on vacation because we're working remotely. So as we begin to focus on the types of communication, we should certainly consider the change in the behavior of those target audience members. And if you've had traditional funnels that consist of those time-based marketing, ultimately, you're gonna have to switch that up in the new normal, right? Now, another thing that you should consider when reassessing your digital marketing plans for the new normal is really understanding that paranoia is going to persist. I wholeheartedly believe that. We obviously have fear-based concerns across the board. When we create content and create those engagements, ultimately we want to be sensitive to that fear. People are starting to be germaphobes. And for me, when I go to hotels, I look and see if those remotes are sanitized. Because it's just like one of those things for me, it just kind of freaks me out, right? But these are the type of things that you should focus on when creating the communication. And when we consider meal delivery services, probably 3 years ago, if I ordered something from Grubhub and they leave it on my doorstep, I would be pissed. Period. But now I think it's more accepted. Like people would almost expect that. So as marketers and we're understanding these fears, when we create, for example, bags that carry our products or services that could be dropped off in the front of someone's doorstep, what type of messaging can we put on that bag, right? When we're communicating that we are sensitive to some of the fears of our target audience members, can we focus on, hey, we sanitize our remotes, right? Like thinking about that type of stuff, auditing the type of content that you may have now, and focusing on addressing some of those fears that your target audience has in the new normal. At-home experiences. Now, I absolutely love Family Feud. outside of the fact that I know Steve Harvey is probably the best host the game show has ever had, hands down, but really, Family Feud was one of the first game shows of its time to make sure that the audience members have a chance to play at home. So you'll notice they'll say, hey, be sure to enjoy this game at home, go pick it up at your local store. Now, Father's Eve had a challenge, and that challenge was essentially taking their very brick and mortar initiative and putting it online. So just to let you know a little bit more about Father's Eve, they basically are a group of dads that came together and decided to have a toast before Father's Day. They thought Father's Day is specifically for family time, so dads need to get together and celebrate. This became a movement. They started in the Midwest, and now they have over 80 chapters across the country. And they were just guys getting together on social media, hanging out together, and celebrating Father's Eve. So what they had to do was they had to create an event that became a hybrid event where these individuals in different chapters are able to come together and connect online as well. And they were able to create a great deal of data by digitizing their experience, all the fathers and all the chapters across the board. Now, what was great about this is even though they were forced to do this, they're able to create a great deal of data that they're able to utilize for sponsorships, for connecting and networking all the other dads across the country, as an example. So what can you do? If you have any type of experiences that you can create with your product or services at the homes of your target audience, it's going to go off much better than you probably would think, simply because that's something that most of your target audience members would be accustomed to. And so thinking about how you can create that in-home experience in the new normal is definitely going to set you up for success. And then making the adjustment. One of my favorite movies is Moneyball. Moneyball, if you don't know, is a movie starring Brad Pitt. And listen, if you know Brad Pitt, most of the movies range from good to great. But essentially, it is a movie about an underdog team that is able to pull itself up by its bootstraps, focus on data, and leverage strategy in order to get them to where they needed to go. Now, listen, I'm biased because I grew up an Oakland A's fan. I'm a Bay Area kid, Northern California, and I had a chance to become a bat boy for a day in high school, and this is like a dream come true. And so anything Oakland A's during that time, I definitely was following. This is one reason why this was my favorite movie. So I want to give you 3 Moneyball-inspired tips that would help you create new strategies for the new normal. One is to review your customer persona. Looking at your current versus your potential customer is key. We all have our strategies locked in for our current customer, but certainly that could have changed based on the market. So who are new potential customers that you can leverage? For example, if you are a brick and mortar but have no space in the e-com sphere, then you certainly can figure that could be a potential opportunity for you. And then who is your customer? Because that could have changed. Market dynamics could have changed who actually your customer is. And where do they live? Not in the physical sense of LA, Chicago, New York, but where do they live online? And then, of course, talking to them where they are. So as you create content, identify if you have a difference between your current and potential customer, if you have customers that are still relevant, and if you're going to talk to them where they are, you're going to create content that obviously is aligned with their user journey. And when we talk about user journey, ultimately you want to review what that buyer journey looks like. So we have a good understanding of what that journey looks like. But when we think about the new normal, more than likely, some of your target audience members are focused more on value-based purchases, meaning that purchase has to provide immediate value right away. If not, they're probably going to hold off. And this is especially true if you're in the B2B sector. So when it comes to when you think about revamping your strategy for the new normal, you certainly want to incorporate more touch points in that user journey, because ultimately that user journey is starting to elongate in the new normal. So what does that mean for you? Well, it means that you'd ultimately need to create more content, more activations via social media, so on and so forth, to continue to nurture those individuals, because that buyer's journey has elongated. And when you think about the types of content and activations you can include, you want to make sure that it's ephemeral content. It's short, bite-sized pieces of content. Because nowadays, when you're trying to tell your story, there's no beginning, middle, and end anymore, right? People really don't have time for that. It's very quick, right? So it has to be bite-sized pieces of content that's stretched out over time for that particular journey. So we certainly want to consider that in the new normal. And the third tip really is embracing the pivot. I mean, we're all sort of dealt a bad hand, but we all have to deal with it, right? We're all in the same market. We're all the competitors that you have are dealing with the same things that you are. So like my mom says, when life gives you lemons, what do? No, you make mojitos. Come on. So ultimately, when we think about what it is like to market in the new normal and how we should prepare ourselves as marketers, as brand leaders, as business owners, it's not about trying to recover. It's all about trying to be innovative, right? And that's one of the reasons why we're all here today, is to expand our skill set, to help contribute to the level of innovation that we can have for our organizations. And so the key takeaways here, when you think about the new landscape and opportunities that it actually may bring in terms of new e-commerce opportunities, in terms of understanding that ultimately all of your competitors are in the same place. When it comes to thinking about the new customer and the psyches and the fear and the challenges that they may have, and making sure that our content, whether it be through social, whether it be through our website, and the specific engagements that we have are aligned, and then adjusting, focusing on tightening up on that brand voice so that you can have more personality, and that and the algorithms will thus reward you for doing so. Understanding that your target audience has new fears based on the unknown, and having your content reflect on some of those fears so that it shows that you are sensitive to them. And then really understanding how this new customer persona is going to ultimately impact the way that you engage with your target audience. And then focusing on having more ephemeral content based on this new normal, and focusing on placing that content in between the gaps of your user journey, because now it is essentially elongated. So those are all the things that I want to leave you guys with. If you guys are interested in learning a little bit more of how we position digital branding, we have a brand new newsletter that we just released. And one specific thing about this newsletter that's pretty unique is that it actually is tailored to your specific needs and interests. Meaning, if you are a solo marketer looking for tips and tricks, or if you are a CMO looking for insights and trends, based on the content you click on, you'll receive more and more content based on that preference. So I welcome you guys to join our newsletter at Digital Delane. And pretty much that wraps it up for me. I appreciate your time, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.